I'm not the kind of guy who looks for trouble, but trouble seems to have a way of finding me. My name's Jake, and I've lived in this quiet suburban neighborhood for about 3 years now. It's a place where people mow their lawns on schedule, power wash their driveways like it's a religion, and the Homeowners Association, HOA for short, rules with an iron fist. I never paid much attention to their endless rulebooks or their snooty letters about community standards. I paid my dues, kept my house in decent shape, and figured that was enough. But apparently, my Harley-Davidson parked in my own driveway was enough to set off a chain of events that'd make your head spin. It all started on a Tuesday morning, just after dawn. I was still half asleep, sipping my coffee, when I heard this god-awful banging at my front door. Not a polite knock, mind you, but the kind of pounding that makes you think the world's ending. Before I could even get to my feet, the door flew open with a crash, splintering the frame. 3 guys in uniforms stormed in, shouting, "You're in violation! You're in violation!" I'm standing there in my boxers, coffee mug in hand, wondering if I'm still dreaming or if I've woken up in some dystopian nightmare. These weren't regular cops. No, these were HOA compliance officers, as they called themselves. They had badges, walkie-talkies, and an attitude like they owned the place. The leader, a guy with a buzz cut and a face like he'd never smiled a day in his life, jabbed a finger at me. "You've been warned, Mr. Callahan. That motorcycle in your driveway violates Section 4.2, Paragraph C of the Covenant. You've got 24 hours to remove it, or we're towing it." I was dumbfounded. Warned. I hadn't gotten any letters, no emails, nothing. And Section 4.2, Paragraph C? Who talks like that? I tried to explain that the bike was mine, that it was parked on my property, and that I'd been parking it there for years without issue. But Buzzcut wasn't having it. He just kept barking about fines and escalation procedures, while his buddies started taking pictures of my living room like it was a crime scene. One of them even had the nerve to comment on my untidy kitchen counter. Now, I'm not a hothead, but there's only so much a man can take. I told them to get out of my house, that they had no right to barge in like that. Buzzcut smirked and said, "We have every right. You signed the HOA agreement when you bought this place. Non-compliance gives us authority to inspect." Inspect? They'd just smashed my door. I was about to lose it when they finally left, tossing a citation notice on my floor like it was trash. I stood there for a good 10 minutes, staring at the wrecked doorframe, trying to process what just happened. My first instinct was to call the real cops, but I knew how that'd go. HOAs are like mini-governments out here. They've got lawyers, connections, and enough money to make your life hell. Plus, I didn't exactly trust the local police to take my side over a bunch of guys in uniforms, even if they were just glorified HOA goons. That's when I decided to call the crew. See, I ride with a group of guys, bikers, like me, who've been through thick and thin together. We're not some outlaw gang or anything like that, just a bunch of working-class dudes who love the open road and the rumble of a good engine. There's Tommy, a mechanic with a beard down to his chest, Ray, a former Marine who doesn't say much but means every word, and Big Mike, who's built like a tank and has a laugh that shakes the walls. We've been riding together for over a decade, and if there's one thing I know, it's that you don't mess with one of us without messing with all of us. I told them what happened over beers at our usual spot, a dive bar just outside town. Tommy was the first to speak, slamming his bottle down. "They kicked in your door? Over a bike? Man, that's some fascist nonsense." Ray just nodded, his jaw tight, while Big Mike cracked his knuckles and said, "Sounds like they need a visit." That's when the idea took shape. We weren't gonna roll up and start a fight, that's not our style. But we were gonna make a point. The HOA thought they could bully me? Well, they were about to learn who they were dealing with. The next day, I did some digging. The HOA's headquarters was a fancy office building about 10 miles away, all glass windows and manicured shrubs. They called it the Community Standard Center, which made me gag. I found out they held board meetings every Wednesday evening, where they'd sit around and decide who to fine next. Perfect. That gave us a target and a timeline. We spent the next couple of days planning, keeping it simple but effective. The goal wasn't to hurt anyone or break anything, just to show them they couldn't push people around without consequences. Wednesday came, and the crew met up at my place around dusk. There were 8 of us total, each on our bikes, engines growling like a pack of wolves. I'd fixed my door as best I could, but every time I looked at it, I got mad all over again. We rode out in formation, the sound of our Harleys echoing through the quiet streets. Neighbors peeked out their windows, probably thinking we were up to no good. Let 'em think what they want. I was done playing nice. When we pulled into the HOA's parking lot, the place was lit up like a Christmas tree. Through the glass doors, I could see a dozen or so people in suits, sitting around a conference table. They looked like they were in the middle of some heated debate, probably about whose mailbox was the wrong shade of beige. We parked our bikes in a neat row, taking up half the lot, and cut the engines. The sudden silence was almost as loud as the bikes had been. Tommy lit a cigarette and leaned against his bike. "You sure about this, Jake?" he asked. I nodded. "They started it. We're just finishing it." Ray checked his watch and said, "Let's make it quick." Big Mike just grinned, like he was having the time of his life. We didn't have weapons or anything crazy like that, just our presence and a plan to make some noise. I walked up to the glass doors and pushed them open. The receptionist, a young woman with a headset, looked up and froze. I gave her my best smile and said, "We're here to discuss a citation." Before she could respond, the crew filed in behind me, boots thudding on the polished floor. The boardroom was just down the hall, and we made straight for it. The suits inside didn't notice us at first, too busy arguing over some PowerPoint slide. But when I cleared my throat and said, "Evening, folks," you could have heard a pin drop. The board president, a guy with a comb-over and a red tie, stood up. "Who are you? This is a private meeting." I held up the citation notice they'd left at my house. "I'm Jake Callahan, and these are my friends. Seems you've got a problem with my motorcycle. Thought we'd come talk it out." The crew spread out, not threatening, just present. Tommy leaned against the wall, blowing smoke rings. Ray crossed his arms and stared at Comb-Over. Big Mike cracked his neck, which sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Comb-Over sputtered, "This is highly irregular. You can't just barge in here." I raised an eyebrow. "Kinda like how your goons barged into my house. Smashed my door." "Yeah, let's talk about irregular." The other board members exchanged nervous glances. One woman, clutching a pearl necklace, whispered something about calling security. I shrugged. "Go ahead. But we're not breaking any laws. We're just concerned citizens, exercising our right to address grievances." That's when Buzzcut walked in. I guess he was part of the board, because he was in a suit now instead of his compliance officer getup. He recognized me and went red in the face. "You. What's the meaning of this?" I stepped forward, keeping my voice calm but firm. "The meaning is, you crossed a line. You think you can kick in doors and threaten people over a bike? You think you're untouchable? We're here to remind you that actions have consequences." For the next 20 minutes, we laid it all out. I told them about the door, the lack of warning, the ridiculousness of their rules. The crew chimed in, each one sharing stories about HOA overreach they'd heard or experienced. Tommy talked about a buddy who got fined for having a basketball hoop. Ray mentioned a neighbor whose dog was deemed too aggressive because it barked at the mailman. Big Mike just stood there, looking like he could bench press the conference table, which was honestly more effective than words. The board tried to push back at first, quoting bylaws and covenants like they were scripture. But they started to falter when I pointed out that their compliance officers had committed property damage, maybe even assault. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew enough to make them sweat. Plus, the sight of 8 bikers in their pristine office was enough to rattle anyone. By the end, Comb-Over was promising to review the incident and reassess the enforcement protocols. Buzzcut looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. We didn't stay long after that. I told them I expected my door fixed and the citation dropped, or we'd be back, with more friends. Then we walked out, slow and deliberate, leaving them to their PowerPoint and their panic. The receptionist was still at her desk, wide-eyed, but she managed a nod as we passed. Outside, we fired up the bikes and rode off, the roar of our engines shaking the glass windows. The next day, I got a call from the HOA's lawyer. He was all apologies, saying there'd been a misunderstanding and that they'd cover the cost of my door. The citation was voided, and they even sent a contractor to fix the frame that afternoon. I didn't hear from Buzzcut again, though I found out later he'd been reassigned to some desk job. The HOA still sent out their newsletters, but they steered clear of my house from then on. The crew and I celebrated that weekend with a long ride out to the coast. As we sat around a bonfire, beers in hand, Tommy raised a toast. To Jake, for standing up to those HOA clowns. Ray added, and to the crew for having his back. Big Mike just laughed and said, next time, we bring the whole club. I smiled, knowing he was half joking but also half serious. That's the thing about the crew, they're family. Mess with one of us, and you mess with all of us. Looking back, I don't regret a thing. The HOA thought they could bully me into submission, but they picked the wrong guy. I'm not saying everyone should roll up to their HOA with a biker crew, but sometimes you gotta push back. Sometimes you gotta show people that you're not just another name on their fine list. My Harley's still in my driveway, shining in the sun, and every time I see it, I'm reminded that some fights are worth having.